Travis Turner is the editor-in-chief at Evil Martians. He helps write, edit, and shape content on a number of cool topics, including Ruby. With a background ranging from journalism, EdTech, to his own time as an IT consultant, he brings a wide-ranging perspective to his work, placing an emphasis on reader experience, helping developers find their voice, share knowledge, and illuminate interesting stories. So, I'll give it over to Travis.
All right, thank you, everyone. Good morning. After yesterday, I realized I didn't have very much interactivity in my talk compared to the other talkers, so this is the interactive portion of the talk right now. And then it'll be done. But my question is, and I'm going to ask a question, and feel free to raise your hand slowly so we don't create like a seismic event with excitement. But how many people in this room are like actively would consider themselves to be like writing in some significant way? Like writing, not code, but like text and stuff like that. Okay, so is that clear on the video that like about 40 or 50% of the people raised their hand in here? And that's good. So hopefully you'll be able to come up to me after this and say, you're wrong. But yeah. So let me see here. My goal today is to give everyone a crash course, there's really no other way to say it, on writing and editing about technical stuff. And we won't be talking about grammar or style or anything like that, like specificity of stuff. I think that's pretty boring. I've fallen asleep in grammar classes in my university. But instead, we're going to look at this from a broader perspective in terms of mindset and process. And so hopefully that you'll be able to take away something from this and do this on your own if you decide to. So my talk is entitled Narrative Reflections, Transmuting Ruby Code into Storytelling Gold. And why is it called this? Well, it's called this actually because it rhymes pretty much. Like code and gold almost rhyme. And I thought that if I had a rhyming title, I would be more likely to be accepted to give this talk. And I'm here now, and I think that's somewhat like evidential that it worked. And so this is the kind of doors that writing can open for you. It can get you into places you're probably not even qualified to be, really. But better question is, rather than like why is this talk called what it is how to begin this talk. And how to begin any talk and any article, there's probably a lot of overlap there. So in the spirit of the topic, I'm going to start with a story. Once upon a time, let's talk about creative writing degrees, which is where I was about 10 years ago. And what's that experience like? It's a lot like the pictures you see here where you sit in circles, like a lot, which can be a pretty uncomfortable experience. And you get a strong sense of mental fortitude from these kinds of programs, because when you see a hand go up like that, you pretty much know that you're about to hear someone say something that's pretty wrong. But, so it's in the midst of this environment, this hellish environment, that I became aware of something called, kind of lame, but Google Cardboard. Does anybody know, more interactivity, yeah, I'll like ad-lib interactivity. Does anybody know about this? You heard about this? Yeah. A lot of people heard about this. Okay, so I knew that this was cool, whatever. I knew I had to have one. People were standing with mouths agape, looking up and reaching out as if they were touching something, and that's pretty cool. I knew that I had to have one, so I ordered one. And if you don't know what it was, it's kind of like this thing that Google was doing to push like interest in VR. It didn't seem to work, but yeah. So, but I remember ordering the thing and getting the thing, and I waited for it. Had some lenses in there. Third parties made them too. Don't remember how long it took to come. I mean, it was a long time ago. It's not important detail. But I do remember trying it out for the first time, and I was in a Rite Aid parking lot, set the scene a little bit. Sometime in 2014, it wasn't this Rite Aid parking lot. It was not as nice as this one. But I remember sliding my phone in this thing, and Yes, Blue Ridge Ruby, yeah. So I remember sliding my phone in this thing, putting it on, and boom! My mind was interested. It was interested. So I realized at that time that I made a huge mistake doing creative writing as a degree, devoting so much of my life to sitting in those circles and stuff like that. Maybe, I don't know. But I'd always been interested in tech, but to be honest with you, I thought I couldn't do it. Yesterday during the presentation where we saw like Pinhead and Hellraiser, this was my impression of what it was like, just madness and difficulty. But that began my journey towards tech because I knew that I wanted to do like storytelling and stuff in that, and this was much more interesting, and I saw a vision of the future when I put that thing on. Isn't that cool? So why am I telling you this story? There will be an important callback to this VR moment later in the story, but more importantly, it's about context. And context is probably one of my top 3 concerns working as an editor. So I wanted to give you some context right now about who I am, where I'm coming from, and my mentality, because it may be helpful to you to understand my approach to my work, to understand who's telling you this. And just an example of how context is important, you'll see that this slide has a number 2. That's because I've actually ripped this slide from somewhere else in the presentation and put it here. It's out of context. I mean, that number 2 doesn't belong there. I mean, you still get what this means, right, generally, but it would be a lot better in the full context. So we'll return to that a little bit later. So let's keep rolling with context. Let's talk about what I do right now. This is a legacy slide where I was doing animations before I abandoned that concept. But Martian Chronicles, we do a blog there. We post about a lot of different stuff. Maybe once a week, not super frequently, maybe twice a week. And we do back-end, front-end design, open source, and Ruby. And I wanted to talk about the way things are there, the writing way. So the first thing is that it's not required. So anything you read on our blog, it's completely voluntary. It's encouraged, sometimes pretty strongly, but there's no strict requirements to do this. So it's all a labor of interest. I won't say love, but it's a labor of interest. Freedom and creativity. This is another pillar of the EM writing way. Our authors are allowed to approach these topics pretty much however they want to, in whatever format they want to, with the caveat of point number 3 is that it should be valuable or interesting for the readers. That's just how we do things. And who is making that judgment? Me and a select council of people are deciding if those topics go forward. But luckily, most of our team has a pretty good grip on what we're looking for. And the last thing that I like to have is developer and author happiness. And maybe we'll talk about how you can find your happiness today. But what does that mean? I want the people, when they work on the blog post, to be proud of it. This is like getting really sentimental now. So when they look at the post, I want a tear to come down their eye when they see the illustration and everything, and it's so beautiful. And also, I kind of think, we're a remote team working around the world. And I see, I don't know if this is still a thing, someone will have to tell me, but in FANG corporations, there's been beanbag chairs, and you've got video games and foosball tables. We don't have that, so I kind of think of myself as a human foosball table. But the analogy can't go any further than that, I realized when looking at this picture. So this infographic that I created, these 100 black ominous squares represent our most recent 100 blog posts. Just some data for, woo. These represent our posts that touched Ruby in some way. It's about 1/3 of our output. I was actually surprised. But I'd like to focus in, this is so cool, on one post in particular that was not a Ruby-specific post, but was written by a front-end engineer. And that post was called, Why Should Developers Write 3 Reasons and 3 Common Blocks? Did anyone here happen to see this post? Let's set the bar low. Did anyone happen to see it? No one. People are shaking their heads, but okay, a couple people are raising their hands. Well, as someone with a lot of skin in the writing game, I was pretty stoked to see that just now. But I was also excited to put this out there and see some of the feedback we would get from the community. We have such a positive community. And I think that I think that it could have been a little bit better. So I protected these people's identities, but to be honest with you, move away from the podium for a second here. They probably didn't deserve it. They probably didn't deserve to have these were jerks, right? But they're on Reddit. And I guess that's to be expected. It's bad news for this talk, it's bad news for this topic, it's bad news for me. The good news is that the admins of the front end subreddit just deleted this whole thread after like 10 minutes after this last one. It's not allowed to be talked about there. This would never happen on a Ruby or a Rails subreddit because those people are good. So why bother a brief case for writing? With feedback like this, I feel like I have to say something before my talk. I can't just let this go. I have to get my public revenge on, I won't dox them, but I have to get my public revenge on these people. So very quickly, we don't have a lot of time. A lot of these are self-evident, but I will take a moment to linger on a few, just because. So first one is contributing to the community. I think it's pretty self-evident. Connecting with friends, like-minded people, finding contributors for your open source, fame, it's very cynical, probably won't happen, but it's on the list. Promoting your product, it's like money, sharing your products, like open source dream. Skill development, I'll stop here for a second. You know, there's this common idea that if you can explain something to someone else, it's an indicator that you understand it. I don't know if that's true or not, but if that is true, then writing down that explanation, you're making like a record of your understanding. And this can help you learn a new skill. If you're trying to learn a new skill, writing about it is a great way to do so. Career development. One common question at interviews, I don't know if they still do this anymore, but I've heard it before. It is like, what is a challenge that you faced at work and how did you overcome it? They read before they did the interview like a list of like the most common interview questions, and they made their list based on that, and then you prepare your answers based on that list. It's very like circular. But imagine how smug you can be like, actually, I have an article about that. And documentation, this one, it could be a whole nother talk, but has anyone ever seen any like poorly done documentation? Maybe that, like, if you have some writing skills, it could help you with that. I don't know. But future-proofing your career, this is another one that I think, I refer to my presenter notes for a second to make sure I got this right. It's important. It's important to future-proof your career, and writing and communication are, like, directly linked. And I think that communication is going to remain a fundamental soft skill going forward. You can quote me on that. Let's see. But in fairness to my co-author of that last piece I showed on why writing, we did get one brave person who relayed a story similar to the interview story I just said, who said he hired a front-end developer on the basis of an article. I'm not going to read it all. Devolute was his name. Thank you, Devolute, wherever you are. I salute you. And I did not vet this person, so if you go Google them and their profile is full of like not safe for work content, I have no responsibility for that either. Let's get locked in for writing. So that's enough context. So the first thing we need to talk about is recognition and collection. And if you take away anything from this talk, this is a principle about this mindset that is critical. So you need to be able to have this ability. It's kind of like if you want to learn how to lucid dream. I don't know if anybody's into this. You need to like check your watch and stuff to like make sure like, is the time funny? Oh, I'm in a dream right now. I'm lucid dreaming, hooray. You need to be looking around and be aware of things that are interesting to you that you might want to write about or that could be valuable. So we'll divide these into two parts, recognition and collection. And recognition, you might think of it as like brainstorming that is like more organized than just sitting down and being like, what do I want to write about? Recognition is like a process that comes to you. It's a mindset. So first thing you could recognize to write about is if you're at work and you have some experience, you have some challenge, some problem, and you overcame that, you can share it. And people do appreciate this. I've got a lot of notes about people that were like, your article helped me. It's like specific to your case, perhaps, but it's a lot more interesting than documentation. And documentation cannot cover all the bases. And so hearing how people get through stuff like that can be really useful. Documentation can be pretty dry. We want something a little more moist. So, for example, here is an example of an article. Yes, here's an example of an article that was built on experience building Ruby in the browser with the Ruby Next Playground. Don't know if anybody saw that, but You can check it out. The view component in the wild series, it's all like project gathered knowledge. The in the wild part, that was me, I made that part. And like that means it's from like real life, it's not like about documentation. I've heard that people read these. Gems, features, products, something you want to share. So you can write about something you've produced. Why did you make it? How did you make it? What was the motivation? This can be a pretty good way to connect with people. Someone could be out there looking for your gem, and an article is a good way to like make these kind of connections. Here's an example we did for Skooma. I do recommend checking out the work of Sviatoslav on our blog. He's got some pretty cool articles. Just about a feature release for Anycable, another example. Another thing you might recognize is you think something should be a certain way. This is basically like thought leadership. And you might think, thought leadership? Who am I? I'm nobody. I'm just an editor of some blog. I don't have a lot of thought leadership power. But I see people writing about the same topics again and again, and I think the little voices can eventually add up. There's a lot of people in this community that have pretty loud voices, and then there's people that don't. So I think don't become cynical about this fact. Do consider it. For example, here's just one. We thought we should have more tech meetups. It looks like the article works. We're here right now. And here was our guide to organizing one that we did. And then there's so many that we don't have time to go through them, but I'll give a couple of other examples. It can be like a setup, configuration, or toolkit. This is a gem file of dreams. It's the top article in the Ruby Weekly this week. Just self-aggrandization from me, I want everybody to see that. Ruby on Wells, this is another popular article that was like that kind of writing Go in Ruby with Ruby Next. This one basically went viral a couple of years ago, but it was like a wild experiment, and it's just cool to read about stuff like that. I think people like that. You could write about your own book. It's probably not good advice for people starting out, but that did happen also. So we're back to recognition and collection. Let's get to the collection part. This is where it gets good. You've recognized things. Now you need to start making your collection. So the best way I could think of to explain what could be collected is by telling you what kind of artifacts I actually get from the people I work with. I call them artifacts. Let's go through them. The first thing I sometimes get is just a polished, perfect document. Nearly. It just needs some minor tweaks and stuff like that. It's probably not really applicable to people starting out. Code samples. Okay, this is more probably in your wheelhouse. If you have some interesting code samples, start gathering them up. Don't just take it for granted that you'll remember that later, because you probably won't. That's like the whole purpose of like comments in the first place. So definitely it can be applicable to code as well. URLs, collection of links. Maybe you want to respond to another article. Like you've read some article and you want to write a response. Like start getting those links, or maybe you've got two articles and you kind of want to connect them in some way. A documentation, this just draws the contrast between what I'm talking about and documentation, the fact that documentation will be a resource. Image board, I've written articles with just images as a guide. Don't think it would be too much for Ruby, but we still have a lot of images in ours and like screenshots of stuff in action and terminals, so you could start gathering those once you get an idea. A mood board. To me, this is really scraping like the bottom of the barrel, but I've seen this before too, where you just start like sticking anything you could possibly think of. Yes. Audio transcriptions, super good idea. Now we have some great transcription services, and you can just start telling whatever you want to and edit it later. And I have to stop and give a shout out to the AI that made that image for me, because I think it invented a new emotion. This seems to be like a mouth and two eyes, and I don't know what the state of being is, but I think it's like the state of being an audio transcription. You might produce a outline, like a rough outline. This is like a skeleton. If you, a basic example of this would be a thread on X, like a thread on X or Mastodon. I don't know if Mastodon does threads. We'll talk about that later. But, because I need to get on there. But it's like a skeleton. You've got like your introduction, the points you want to make, the conclusion, and then you got to flesh it out. Just like a real skeleton gets flesh, a dark interpretation, but that's what we actually, or here we go, the brain dump. This is when you absolutely have nothing. You have nowhere to go. You have extreme writer's block. You open a document, and you just start writing down whatever you're thinking. Like, even if it's like, I'm trying to think of something right now, it probably won't work, to be honest with you. If you've gotten to this point, I just give you kudos for trying, but it could grease up things for later. I've seen that happen. Does anybody know who this is? 0 people? This is a person that keeps coming into my algorithm, my feed. On the left, this guy is named Daryl, but he's channeling an extraterrestrial named Bashar, who is apparently lingering in his spaceship just out of Earth orbit. And he gets messages, and then he helps people with their problems. Maybe that will happen to you if you do the brain dump thing. I doubt it, but it could. And at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that there would be a callback to the VR and Bashar in VR. Everything's coming full circle here. These are all literary techniques. Pay attention. Okay, story. What is a story? We've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. So far, we've basically been talking about like the metadata of a story, the stuff that we consider before we even start. We've not even really started writing. We've got our toolkit in place. What do? Well, you've got to start doing something. You've got to produce something. And as you go through that process, these are the things you want to keep in mind. The first one is context. We're back. The slide is in proper context. Thank God. We've already talked about context quite a bit. It's not something you want to consider just for the beginning of a piece. You want to consider it throughout the piece. And I'll just share 2 things about how I go about it. The first one is just keep it in mind. We already talked about that. The second one is I always err on the side of giving a little bit more context than is necessary. I think from my experience, feel free to debate me after this, but from my experience, we tend to, when we're writing something about an area of expertise, we tend to give a little bit less context by default. Because we're writing basically to ourselves by default, a lot of times, not always. So keep that in mind. I like to widen the net just slightly, not too big. This is an instinct that you have to have. Because if you go too broad, suddenly you're like explaining like what variables are and stuff like that. You have to like know what you're doing and get an instinct for that. And that does require some practice, but my rule of thumb is just a little bit more than necessary. Okay, read aloud. I thought this was something that I only knew about, but apparently other people know about this too. So if you, there's a lot of benefits to reading something aloud. The first thing is you can catch like structural errors that other, like the Google Docs spell check would not catch. That's one thing. The second thing is you can check if your ideas are coming through or if like you're going off on a tangent that you didn't want to. And it's also going to ensure that your voice is actually in there because writing and speaking are really 2 separate skills. They're quite divided. If you've ever tried to learn another language or if you've ever spoken with someone who speaks another language natively and you've seen like their speaking abilities versus their writing abilities, I mean, this is formalized. These are 2 different skills. And so if you are writing in writer's mode, the result of what you get might be pretty different. That being said, not all text is meant to be read aloud. This is a sentence from a William Faulkner book. It's 1 sentence. It's quite loud. You probably need an editor. This is too long by all accounts. All right. Think of the work as a whole. Again, we're still in the process of creating our text. Don't get too focused on a particular sentence, a particular paragraph. To give a practical example of what I mean by this, I work with other people and sometimes I'll have like a Google Doc with a bunch of comments and suggestion mode. It's marked up. There's like basically open issues that need to be resolved. You might see this in like a pull request as well, but it's not as relevant. But I'm trying to draw an analogy to be more inclusive. But anyway, if I see a document like this, I can't really properly get a feel for editing it until all of that stuff is resolved. I have to go back and start fresh and look at the document again. Maybe I'll read it aloud again. That's just me. If I've got all these open notes, once you resolve things, it may change the character of the text. Your meaning might get lost. And now, after you've got something, it's time to edit. And this is the better part. Writing, I actually don't even like it. It's terrible. I get pretty nervous because you're creating something out of nothing. And editing, I would compare it to something like refactoring or debugging code. And so in this case, what are the bugs? Bugs are basically just anything that is like objectively wrong in the text, like a typo is wrong, or maybe incorrect information you decided to put in there for some reason. these are wrong things. Or anything that's not like in your voice, structurally sound, or just doesn't make sense, or it's getting away from your meaning or your message. You got to get rid of that stuff. And that can be kind of hard, so there's a couple of ways to do this. I've heard it can be hard to debug your own code. It can be hard to edit your own text as well. You might find a partner, someone that's also interested in writing. Maybe someone here today will make that connection and link up. I don't know, probably not. But if you do find someone, you have the ability to work with them, and they'll be your editor back and forth. Or, and I've seen this happen a lot, and I know this happens, you just wait some amount of time, and you'll get fresh eyes, and you'll be able to go back and read it again with a fresh set of eyes. As a rule, a week is probably too long, but even 2 hours can be helpful here. And the final editing tip, which has a different legacy code style or legacy slide style, is to cut stuff out. This is just be a little, especially with writing about technical stuff, you should probably cut stuff off. A lot of people are maybe thinking about this talk right now, that I should have cut stuff out. As a good rule of thumb, I turned to the Hobbit trilogy, and the fact that it was met with laughter just upon the appearance of the image, I didn't even say anything. This should have been one movie, a short movie, not an extra length movie, but we got 3. So don't do this. And shame on the people that did. They should have known better. All right, so how am I doing on time? Terribly. So the next slide I kind of have to give a warning for. Just stick with me and everything's gonna be okay. I need you stick me for 30 seconds. So pitfalls, or as I like to call them, sinkholes. This is the best image I could find of a horse caught in a sinkhole. 160 likes, sickos. Stick with me, okay? Yes. Do not worry, horse was rescued. What's the message here? Well, I had to reverse engineer one, but the first thing is that a little bit of suspense can be a good thing. And we don't really do that. We don't do these dramatic techniques in our technical writing, but maybe we should. I've tried to incorporate them, and I'm going to keep doing that. The other thing is, if you do get caught in any of these pitfalls, I'm going to call them sinkholes, you can get out of them just like this horse, and this advice will help you do that. So the first thing that I see a lot of people do is they just simply care too much. Probably like those Redditors earlier, they were probably just insecure about their own writing abilities, and they decided to take it out on me when they were just overthinking it. They wanted to get started. Nowadays they call this imposter syndrome. I don't like that term because I think it should describe something else where you have like a person that you think is like you around. I just call that self-doubt. Okay, so or making excuses. You know, it's like I don't have time. I don't understand the Faulkner thing. Why'd he say that? Bashar, help me. So number 2 is I don't know what to write. Yeah. Oh, I know how to write. Yes, now I'm getting back on track. I know how to write. I wouldn't really worry too much about this. As an example, well, we have Bashar again. There is an X account dedicated to the typos of the New York Times. It's a pretty active account, I found. And so the paper of record, it turns out, supposedly the paper of record, the New York Times, riddled with errors. And also, we have a quote here from Bashar. He says, it's not an accident, it's an orchestration. I don't know what it means, but I take it to mean if you're just getting started out, don't overthink issues of style and grammar too much. Focus more on what I talked about earlier, which is your message and your voice. Yeah, okay. Going too big out the gate, this is the thing I see a lot of people do. They want to make like the ultimate guide to some huge topic. I don't recommend you do this because you spend a tremendous amount of time on a particular topic, and then like you put it out in the world and you're like, nobody paid attention to it. You also need to understand I recommend going smaller at first. Go more niche and go more personal and go more unique to you. And as another thing, we'll get back to that. You also have to consider that you're iterating on the process of your publications as well. Like when you put something out there, you learn from each time you do that. You don't want to have like just one big Bible. You want to keep it a habit and keep going. And you learn more as you publish more. Don't be, I'm like borrowing stuff, I'm stealing stuff from yesterday's talk, but like don't be afraid of like failure and discomfort and, embrace it. This one, I don't have enough time. Well, whatever. But I would just like to point out Paul Ken, a.k.a. Vladimir Dementiev, a.k.a. my best friend. That's news to him if he watches this talk. He really helped me prepare for this talk today, and he's super prolific. And I would just like to say that he writes a ton of Ruby articles on our blog. He has his own blog with the Any Cable. He wrote a book last year, which I showed earlier. He has a job, as I understand. He also has a life. And he moved from one side of the country to the other, and he seems to be super prolific. I talked to him expecting to find that he was like just a person that was into writing. And as it turns out, a little bit of insight, when he first started, he was like totally not into it all, and he was basically against it. He was pretty much forced to start. But I think for people here that are skeptical, we've gotten a lot of great things from this person, and he didn't want to do this. So if you're one of these people that don't want to do this, you're like, I don't have the time, I don't have the point, I'm going to post on Reddit. That literally was me. I'm sitting in the crowd right now. What are you in there? But think about that. Like, you also are helping. Helping is good. So challenges in the future, I'm going to kind of slide over this for the sake of time. I saw this, use a laser pointer for once. The preceding content was 100% generated by a human contributor, Forbes. I wish I had more time to talk about like text-based AI stuff. That's a separate talk, but I'll just put it out there. I like it, but I have not been able to automate my job or get my job destroyed just yet. Maybe next month. Sharing your work. For the Ruby people here, these are kind of like your bread and butter to get started. Go to rubyflow.com, submit it there. This is a feed, a great way to get picked up in newsletters like Ruby Weekly and other ones as well. The Ruby and the Rails community on Reddit are pretty friendly, And if you want to find me, you can check out the Evil Martians blog or find me on Threads. This is a joke. I'm not using Threads. You come get me and I'll tell you how to contact me. Parting thoughts, okay, inspirational thoughts. So this is like a thing from a lecture that the author Kurt Vonnegut gave, which was about the shape of stories. And the fact that I'm even talking about like this is a thing with the articles that I'm suggesting you all write is bonkers insane. But at my best, I feel like I'm like writing lines like this, and that is not great. I think that maybe the people here have the chance to write much more dynamic kind of lines. And to explain the graph a little bit, it's like Cinderella, boy meets girl, man in the hall. These are like different things, and the axis with the G up there represents like good fortune and ill fortune. But for our purposes, let's just say like good and bad experience, or like anything. In any case, I'm like this. So I hope that you will hear this and you will write something. And I hope that you will send it to me. We are concluding now, if it's not obvious. I hope that you'll send it to me and I will like it. But even if I don't like it, I will lie to you. And I will tell you that I liked it. So find me on Threads and send that to me, and I'll review it, and I'll say, yes, I liked it, very good, because it's better that probably you continue as a mindset and a habit instead of getting a bunch of people on Reddit just hurting your feelings. Anyway, that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. Yes.